Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Unbroken Arrows podcast. And today, my guest is Mike Klosowski, who is the Regional Wildlife Supervisor for the South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks. And we're here to talk about elk today. So, Mike, welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate the invite.
Oh, this is going to be fun. I do not know a whole lot about elk. And you'll hear one of the reasons why I contacted you maybe a little bit later in the podcast. I'll share with the listeners as to what that is. But I think elk are a fascinating animal, and I think they are really one of the crown gems of those animals that are managed by the South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. It is a very cherished resource for South Dakotans here. It's quite frankly, it's something that people wait their whole entire lifetime to go experience if they're into hunting elk. And of course, there's lots of people that really enjoy just viewing them, listening to them. They certainly are a fascinating animal and draw a lot of attention from both the hunting community and the non-hunting community as well.
Let's go that direction to start with. I'll talk a little bit or ask a little bit for you to share some of the management strategies here in a little bit, but you talk about sometimes people wait a lifetime to hunt elk and experience that hunt. I'm guessing that is because there are limited number of tags that are issued each year, and some of the statistics I bet are pretty impressive, maybe staggering for some, that keeping them maybe from applying. But what's that process, Mike? And tell me, what are some of the chances that some folks might have to draw a tag?
Yeah, Greg, let's go ahead and let's talk first a little bit about the elk draw. So actually, it might be we're right in the midst of our first elk draw, with the first deadline coming May 20th at 8 a.m. for any elk. And that's, of course, for bulls, that's for cows, that's for the first crack at all the different elk species and seasons that we have. And then, of course, we have the second app deadline, which is June 18th, and that's for the leftovers. Typically, what you're going to see at that time is you're going to see leftover cow tags for various different seasons that are out there, but some really good options for people. The first deadline, of course, is for folks that have not had an elk license in the last 9 years. And those on the second draw, for those folks that have had a license in the last 9 years, or maybe 20 years, whatever the case may be, those leftover tags, they can apply for those and potentially get those. So as I mentioned, there's 5 different seasons to choose from. There's the Black Hills Firearms, there's Black Hills Archery, Prairie, CSP Early Archery, and then firearms as well. So number of different options out there. As we kind of alluded to, people wait a lifetime in some cases to get an elk license. And the average draw for a person to get any elk license in a unit like H2, which some people refer to it as the big unit, or the unit with all the public land in there, the average wait is roughly 18 years for both firearms and archery folks. So it's
wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, but you just never know, because somebody's going to win those licenses. Our lottery system it does have groups. It has preference groups. It has landowners. It has groups with no preference, etc. And typically those licenses are spread out amongst those folks with higher preference points having a better odds of getting one of those tags. But you just never know. You might be one of those lucky folks that has 6 years of preference, and you draw an H2 any elk license, and it's a true lottery system for sure.
No, I was going to say, for those listening that may not understand what a preference point is, can you kind of talk about that and how people can get preference points?
Yeah, you bet. So South Dakota, when you apply for a license or a season that there is more demand than supply, essentially, let's just say there's 10 tags available, but 20 people put in, there's going to be 10 people that didn't get a tag. So those 10 people the next year that weren't successful have an option to purchase a preference point, which will give them better odds the next year of drawing that tag. So those folks in the next year that have that one preference point, and all the other folks don't have any, those folks with one preference point better odds of getting that license. So I always recommend folks apply for those preference points when they're out there, whether it's deer, antelope, elk, etc. It's really important. And as you go along in your hunting career journey, etc., you can really utilize that system to plan out when you're going to go for, say, an elk hunt or a pronghorn hunt or deer. And you can simply just go onto the Game Fish and Parks website, look at the draw statistics, and look at roughly how long it's going to take you to get that license. And you can start saying, well, if I apply now, it's going to take me 3 years to get that license. So this year I'll do something else, and by the third year, I'll be able to get that license. So those folks that are really savvy with those preference points, they really know how to utilize the system and can, quite frankly, hunt a lot of different species when they choose to.
How many units are there then?
So for elk, we have 5 different seasons roughly, and there's about roughly 19 different units in South Dakota. So you have units out on the prairie, you have Harding County, you have units over in Bennett County, and then moving back to the west, you have Fall River, you have Custer, Pennington, and all of those counties are not necessarily, if you are part of a county, you're involved in a certain unit, they can cross different counties. So you could be, for example, you could be in Unit 2 and you could be in Pennington, Lawrence, and Custer. So units are really geared at managing the elk and where do they go and where are those populations, where do they typically winter at, where do they summer at, where are they available in terms of fall hunting.
So with regard to the units, are there units across the whole state, or based on the elk population, are all of these units West River?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Greg. So all of the elk units are West River, and we have a large unit West River that encompasses most of the prairie that we call WRA, which essentially means elk out on the prairie. And in that area, we don't do any surveys at this time, and we don't have a management objective. At this time, we have 20 different bull tags and then roughly about 40 cow tags. And we're essentially with that unit managing it by social tolerance. What are the hunters seeing? What are the landowners seeing? What sort of issues are they causing, etc. Then as you move over to the northwest into Harding County, we are managing for elk in that county. There is some very good elk habitat up in that area. As you move down into the Black Hills, we definitely are managing for elk in the Black Hills Fire Protection District. And the Black Hills Fire Protection District is the only area that we actively survey and look at what elk numbers are doing and looking at recruitment, etc., as to, is the elk population going up? Is it going down? What is hunter success? What is the average age of bulls, etc., that we have in that unit? When it comes to those prairie units, at this time, it's very difficult to survey those areas. The siteability models, when we're out there doing our aerial surveys, we just can't come up with information that would be most reliable. But we do work with landowners in those areas. We work with hunters in those areas so that we can have a better idea of what they're seeing on the ground, what our staff are seeing on the ground, and go from there.
Right. And that's a lot of times you hear about citizen science projects and those types of things and helping out. And that's just like the rural mail carrier surveys or counts for pheasant and things like that. So I'm sure the information that people can share are a big help, and it saves a lot of time for you as well. Well, Mike, that's a perfect segue to the question that I have about managing. And one of the things that I will share is that I did read a recent article that you wrote in the spring edition of the South Dakota Game, Fish and Parks Conservation Digest. And the title of the article is Managing One of South Dakota's Largest Members of the Deer Family, Elk. And it would be a great companion article to this podcast, as a lot of interesting information about how you and the Game, Fish, and Parks manage the elk. But could you give us an overview of that? Because I'm pretty sure that just as you described with areas that it's just difficult to get any kind of a survey, whether it's aerial or on the ground, there's a lot that goes into that management.
Yeah, there really is a lot that goes into it. Luckily enough, we have quite a number of biologists here in the western part of the region that really live for this kind of stuff. We have a number of folks that are out flying. We have folks that are in the office here crunching numbers. And then, of course, we have folks like me that oftentimes don't get out into the field too often. But that's part of the gig. That's part of how that works. But no, I did write that article here. And one of the objectives is just kind of shed some light on management of elk in South Dakota and bring awareness to how important it is to South Dakotans and how important it is for folks that are out there hunting elk to participate in the number of different, quite frankly, elk surveys that we have. Like you said, citizen science. There's a couple of different surveys, elk age structure and then elk harvest survey that we specifically are surveying and asking hunters out there, what are they seeing, or could you please send us something? Because it's very vital information that we need to get. So it kind of in a nutshell, elk management in South Dakota, a couple different important factors. Carrying capacity, one, how much habitat is out there, how much forage is out there, are we in a drought, has there been plenty of rain? And then, of course, social tolerance. There's a lot of things that play into social tolerance. Elk can be problematic in an agriculture setting, so we have to take that into consideration. We have to weigh those factors and visit with those landowners to make sure we're within reason and we're managing at their appropriate level. There's multiple facets that we utilize. We use an elk stakeholder group. We have a biannual report, or a report that we put out every other year, and then we have an elk management plan that helps guide us in addition to other things that I'd mentioned. With the elk stakeholder group, that's a diverse group that meets about every 4 years, kind of discuss elk management, what's going on, what's happening, what has changed. And that's made up of agency staff, that's made up of collaborating other agencies like Forest Service would be part of that, or potentially BLM, landowners across the countryside, landowners from out on the prairie to Hardin County to landowners that are in the Black Hills Fire Protection District. And of course, hunters, and then other folks, leaders in the outdoor industry that know and visit with quite a lot of other hunters and might have maybe some trending information or things that they're seeing going on. But what we want is a lot of input from the public. This is definitely something that we need all of the community's help to help manage. Then, of course, we have the biannual elk report that comes out every other year, and that's kind of a snapshot at elk populations, hunting seasons, survey results. And then we have an elk management plan, which is primarily a historical document, but it just contains a lot of info. It contains everything from A to Z in terms of elk management in South Dakota. And an important part of that is a historical document. So ultimately it's, 2024, and there's questions about what we did in the 90s. That would be a document that we would reference and try to go back and see what was in there. All of this information is available on the Game Fish and Parks website, gfpsd.gov, and you can print that off and read it at your leisure. And there's some pretty interesting information in there.
Sure. I used to teach science. I was a high school science teacher before I went into administration. And one of the things that you learn, well, it's probably in every particular avenue of work, whether it's business or education or anything, what you're doing doesn't happen in a vacuum. So other people are experiencing some of the same types of issues or problems that you might be experiencing as well. And I'm guessing that since states like Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, for sure, that also manage elk, do you communicate with those Department of Natural Resources or Game and Park agencies and communicate with them with regard to things that work with regard to their management plan or things that they were struggling with?
Yeah, we do. That's another great question, Greg. We do. We visit with Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota. We actually have meetings. What we typically, South Dakota, in terms of game, fish, and parks, is broke up into 4 different regions. And each one of those regions typically has an annual meeting with the neighboring states to discuss just what you said. What's going on, what's working, what sort of research are you involved in, et cetera. I know a good example of that would be Elk Mountain. Elk Mountain has a population of bighorn sheep on it. Those bighorn sheep spend part of their time in South Dakota on the mountain, and then they spend part of their time in Wyoming on the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very important that we share information, whether it's surveys, what's your plan for this year? What are you thinking you guys will offer for tags on your side of the boundary there? And so, yeah, it's really important that we communicate that information back and forth and understand kind of what are some of the trending issues that are coming down the pipeline.
I'm going to circle back to some of the hunting questions and pick your brain about some of those kinds of things. But another one of the reasons why I made contact with Mike was a few weeks ago, my wife and I were out in the Black Hills, and we were on our side by side and taking advantage of traveling some of the Forest Service roads. She has hunted elk before. We started the discussion that, well, if it were September, October, she said, I would have a real good idea as to when to be looking and where to be looking, but it's early May, and I really don't. So that we just had that discussion, wondering just how the behaviors of the elk are different times of year, because again, hunting isn't for everybody, and looking for wildlife is something that everybody can enjoy at different times of the year. And we were fortunate enough to see a pair of elk, and then later on a single elk in the afternoon twilight while we were up there. So that was a lot of fun. But I thought, okay, let's ask Mike these questions. What if somebody was out on a side by side in the spring? Where and when would they look? What would be the best time, I guess, maybe to increase your chances to maybe see the elk in the wild?
Yeah, you bet. So elk right now are moving from their wintering grounds. They're going to, well, the cows are going to their calving grounds, and the bulls will be moving from the wintering grounds, and they'll be moving in their bachelor groups, moving to wherever they're going to spend their summertime time period.
You talk about the bachelor groups, and that makes me think, okay, elk are one of the animals that drop their horns. So it would be size would be a differentiation between bulls and cows. But when do they lose their antlers, and at what point in time do they start to grow back that you might be able to see that? Because of the three that we saw, one was a pretty good sized elk, but it didn't have any antlers that we could tell, and the other two didn't have any either.
Yeah. So elk will lose their antlers a little bit later than deer. If you're a deer shed hunter, you're looking at deer starting to drop their antlers in late December if the weather is bad, and then into January, February, with that early February period starting to be kind of the peak of when they're dropping. And if you're a shed hunter, you're kind of looking where they're yarded up at that point in time, so you can hopefully get permission to go out there and do some shed hunting. Elk, a little bit later. So elk are going to lose their antlers late March, first week in April. At that time, they typically are separated from the cow herds, and they are in their bachelor groups already, kind of hanging out, getting over the winter, and starting to think about going back to where they're going to summer. And so about late March, early April is the time frame to really start to go out and look at where those sheds are at. Now, when do they start growing back? It is a very, very short period of time of after that. They're likely to be already starting. I know I saw some deer the other day that already had velvet antlers starting to grow, so they would likely be already having some stumps already growing out of there that are, of course, covered in velvet, and they're a live growing tissue throughout the summer, and then they're going to harden off about mid-August.
And what about the cows? When do they calve? When do they start having their young?
Cows are going to be moving from their wintering grounds right about now. They're going to be moving to their calving grounds, and elk are going to have their calves about the same time that deer do. So about that first week in June is kind of the peak of when they drop those. That is pretty much that's what they're getting ready for right now. They're got a couple weeks out, and they're looking for that spot that they have all the different resources that they want, that they're not going to be bothered, and find that place, and they're going to set up shop.
Do they become more, what's the word?
Reclusive?
There you go. Well, thank you. So at that point in time, then will the cows start to separate themselves out and become more reclusive?
Yeah, so they're going to find that spot to have their calf, and they're not going to want to be bothered. Essentially, they're going to want to be in an area that there isn't a lot of people. Once they have those calves, they're gonna group back up with all the other cows, and then they're relatively back to being easy to see again. And June can be a time frame that can be pretty good elk viewing, but of course you have to be in that right spot because they're in those groups. Typically, it's going to be some of those meadows that maybe are a little bit off the road, off the beaten path. Maybe you have to hike over a ridge to kind of get back there and see. But that can be an option too, or a time where elk can be very, very viewable.
Okay, with that in mind, what time of day is the best time of day? And I'll ask that question again. Let's go this way. What time of day, like now during May, would be the best time to go out and view, as opposed to, does that change in the fall?
Yeah, so best viewing time for elk is going to be very similar to most other species of wildlife. They're crepuscular. They're going to be active at sunrise and active at sunset. So those are going to be your two best times to view elk. Midday, especially a hot day, they're going to go find some dark timber. They're going to go find a ridge. They're going to go find somewhere where they can kind of lay down, hang out, and not be bothered. In terms of during the hunting season in September and October, those are probably going to be your peak times, not only for hunting but elk viewing as well. As people know, that's the prime time for when you can hear elk. You can hear elk bugling. Oftentimes those males are out there moving into those herds of cows and defending those herds of cows against other lesser bulls, satellite bulls that are out there moving around, and can be a really great time. Again, the best time is going to be at sunrise and at sunset. And particularly, I like the mornings for viewing elk or hunting elk. I really, especially if you have good night conditions, it seems like they can stay active, into that first hour or two of light.
Okay, then what are good night conditions?
So good night conditions in September, October. So third week in September is about the peak of the rut for bulls. So they'll be out there bugling like crazy at sunset and an hour after sunset. It's pitch dark out there. Oftentimes folks can get out and just get out on a country road in the Black Hills National Forest, get away from people, get away from other sound, and just turn off the vehicle, sit out on the back tailgate and just listen. And oftentimes you can hear the elk bugling off in the distance, and then you can kind of move a little bit closer. Couple great spots for doing that. Custer State Park would be one, right from the game lodge there. As you go down the wildlife loop, that's a favorite spot to go to see elk and hear elk, especially like I mentioned in that third week in September when they're out there bugling. The other place, Wind Cave. Wind Cave is another great place to view wildlife. But Black Hills National Forest, there's roughly 7,000 elk that are running around there, and they're from all the way from the south end of it to the north end of it. And you kind of just have to do your homework and figure out where they're at that day.
By far the largest population of South Dakota elk are in the Black Hills proper?
Yes. Yep. So in the Black Hills proper, we are managing for an elk herd between 6,000 and 8,000 elk. After quite a bit of input from those groups like we talked about before, landowners, sportsmen and women, folks that are in the outdoor industry, we came on a elk objective of 6,000 to 8,000. When we have drought conditions, we're managing towards the end. When we have good conditions, we're managing towards the top.
Okay, so 6,000 to 8,000 is what you're managing then. And that would be in just the Black Hills, or is that the total population of elk in the state?
Yep. So the population that in the Black Hills that we manage for is between 6,000 and 8,000. That is the only population where we have an objective in terms of population of what we want to see. Outside of the Black Hills, so when you talk prairie elk seasons or prairie elk management, in those situations, we're managing for hunter success and landowner tolerance. What are the landowners seeing? What sort of issues are they having in terms of agriculture? And then what is the success rate for people that are out there hunting? Those are the two primary factors there. So the only population that we have an objective and actively say this is how many elk we're estimating at would be the Black Hills, and that would be the Black Hills Fire Protection District.
So now I'm originally from Nebraska, and Nebraska does have an elk hunting season. And I don't know if it's I don't know what their active management plan is for the elk living in Nebraska, but I would think that as you were talking about the bighorn sheep that crossed from South Dakota into Wyoming and back and forth, I would think that that would be part of what Nebraska's management plan would be as well, is that some of those elk that come to Nebraska probably come down south from South Dakota. And you mentioned about some of the things that are happening with landowners and agriculture. Now, a couple of years ago, and I can't remember if it's two or three now, but Nebraska had a special elk season that was trying to cull the herd that was, well, I think it was in the Platte River Valley, maybe north, or excuse me, south of North Platte in that area. And so those are the types of, because when they kind of take residence in a cornfield, they just take residence in a cornfield and they trample it down and bed down in it. And it's pretty destructive. So is that the type of management then you're talking about also when you're talking about agricultural management and helping farmers maybe control those types of issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Managing for elk on in areas where we do have agriculture is really challenging. As you put it perfectly, when elk set up shop in a cornfield, it's not a good thing. It's going to be really challenging, and we're going to have to figure out how to get those elk out of there. And we have a number of different programs that we work with producers out there in the countryside. Of course, we have the hunting seasons where both landowners and the public are able to get licenses to help trim that herd out when they do get to be at a level that the tolerance just isn't there anymore. And as you mentioned, Nebraska having that special cull season, we definitely do trade elk back and forth with Nebraska, especially in that Bennett and Todd County area when we might have put particularly heavy pressure on those elk in that unit, in those prairie units. Nebraska will see an influx of elk down in their neck of the woods and vice versa. So it's certainly a challenge. Game Fish and Parks has worked with quite a number of producers across the country. We have a toolbox with a number of different options for folks to help alleviate some of those issues. It might be something as simple as hazing elk out of a cornfield. It could be something to the point of having some sort of kill permit or something like that, where they're actually going to lethally remove an elk from a situation where it might be in a cornfield or something along that lines. But our objective or our goal is to have the public and the hunters do as much of that as possible. Over the last roughly half a decade, Game Fish and Parks has averaged over $300,000 on elk depredation type of programming. So quite a bit of funds go to that. That's a credit to hunters when they're out there purchasing licenses, because a lot of that money that goes from those licenses that they purchase go to that program so that we can have elk on the countryside in areas that do have agriculture.
Elk as a species, they have a tendency to wander. I mean, they can travel, and maybe just a single elk as well can travel quite a distance. Remember it, I grew up in northeast Nebraska, and I remember people reporting seeing a single elk kind of wandering around, but that does happen. I guess I should ask, am I correct with that they do have a tendency to wander?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Greg. They do. They're very nomadic species, and even within the Black Hills, some of those elk never leave the Black Hills. Yeah, even within there, they have their wintering areas, they have their summer areas, calving areas that they go when pressure from hunters have come about. But also sometimes they just start to wander and looking for greener pastures. And every year we keep track of any sort of anomaly in terms of animals in places where they typically aren't, whether it's elk, moose, wolves, whatever the case may be, lions. We do see elk in areas. It could be all the way up in the northeast in Day County, or it could be over into Lincoln County, Turner County, Sioux Falls area. So I believe it was just last year that there was a 5-point elk that ended up the farmer while they're combining their field ended up finding it dead in their field. So you just never know where they're gonna show up.
My guess would be that sometimes maybe an elk would start to wander. Maybe it was sick. Maybe it was a disease. But with elk being part of the deer family, are they impacted by chronic wasting disease (CWD)?
Yeah. Unfortunately, elk are affected by chronic wasting disease, and chronic wasting disease is a prion that gets into infects the elk and is lethal every time. And it's really, really difficult to rid it in the environment. It can live in the soil for years. It can be in places where a person just wouldn't think that it could be or could live. So it's just really vitally important that hunters, when they're out there, do a good job of following those CWD regulations that we have in place.
What about EHD, the hemorrhagic disease that is found in deer? Does that also impact elk?
Typically, no, we don't see it impacting elk. We're primarily seeing that affect whitetail deer mostly, and
Okay.
then mule to a lesser extent.
Okay. Well, I told you I wanted to circle back to hunting, and this would be probably a good time. As I've shared with you, I have never hunted elk before, and once I started to do a little bit of research, I found out that it might take a few years to get a tag, and we talked about that. But let's say somebody applies for a tag and they're a novice hunter like myself. What do they need to do to prepare for an elk hunt?
So they need to do a number of different things to, if they want to be successful, if they want to have an enjoyable hunt, there's certainly going to be some homework and there's certainly going to be some preseason work. When in terms of preseason work, would highly recommend that a person get into a little bit better shape than what they maybe are typically in. And that could involve running, walking, hiking, walking with a pack on that has, some weight on it. Yeah, really just get out there, get out in nature, get some of that blood flowing, get the sweat flowing, and make sure that you're in shape to get out there. Because if you're out there on your first day and you decide to hike over 3 miles, over a ridge and back, by day 2, by day 3, by day 4, you're going to be so sore and it's just going to be a real challenge to really continue to hunt. So first thing I would say is to get out there, get out in nature, get in shape, get some exercise. Then I would look at equipment needs. As far as equipment goes, in elk, you're going to be doing a lot of glassing. You're going to be doing a lot of watching, a lot of looking over ridges, side hills, meadows, etc. So I would get yourself a good pair of binoculars that are comfortable, that you can see fairly well out of. And then I'm a very couple important factors is just good boots and good socks. Recommend a good firm boot like a Canatrek or a Crispy or a good sock that is going to maybe reduce chances of moisture issues or getting blisters. If a person is not out there comfortable, if they don't have the proper gear, they're just going to really it's going to be more of a challenge to really give it all you've got if you're going to be out there for long days. Next on the equipment list would be navigation. And out here in the Black Hills, there's a lot of roads out here, but people still do every year. They get lost and they end up having to spend the night or worse. So really look at having yourself a GPS, know how to operate it. And nowadays, of course, most folks are using OnX. OnX is a great tool to utilize. You can put your phone on plane mode, and you can watch yourself on your phone and make waypoints and have maps, etc. So that's another tool that I highly recommend investing in. And then as far as equipment, the last thing would be a good pack. You're going to have lots of stuff that you're going to be hauling around in there. You're going to have food. You're going to have calls. It's going to be cool in the morning, and then as you hunt, it might start to warm up. So you're going to be shedding some layers. So you're going to have a pack with you that is comfortable, and you can get all of that stuff in.
And that's a great point. I think to add to that is that watch the weather as well, because you could be in a situation where you're planning to go out in the hills. Yet the elevation's higher, so it's a little bit cooler, but at the same time, you could have a front move through and it gets considerably colder than what you were planning for. And you don't want to be unprepared in any of the elements like that. So, but then at the same time, you could be planning on cooler weather in the upper elevation there and it gets awful warm. So,
Yeah.
Be prepared, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Be prepared. In South Dakota, when you're above 6,000 feet, you could have 32 degrees in the morning and then 70 degrees during the day. And so, yeah, a lot of times folks are layering up. And of course, as you mentioned, there could be rain. There could be, you just have, it's great to have a pack so you can put all your different stuff in there. And that's something that I would recommend folks invest in.
Is it correct to say that most of the land that people would be hunting elk in South Dakota most likely would be public land?
Yeah, in South Dakota, we're blessed with all kinds of public property, whether it's Forest Service, BLM, game production area, walk-in area. We have a lot of producers out there that lease the hunting rights to their property to us, so the public can go out there and enjoy that. Yeah, so you're going to be oftentimes hunting on public land. So that's where that Onyx or that GPS comes in place, where you can put those map layers on there so that you can stay on that public land. However, there's certainly a lot of private land as well, and there's some units where it's mostly private land. Units like Unit 9 or Unit 4, which essentially is just straight south of Rapid City and then straight east of Custer State Park. So, and those folks oftentimes are very willing to let you go out there and harvest an elk. So,
Okay. And then with public land, the topic of etiquette and hunting etiquette, there are quite a few people that are hunting elk during the season. And you've got archery and firearm seasons don't overlap. Is that correct?
yeah, so that is correct. For elk in South Dakota, the September timeframe is for archery hunters. And then come October 1st, then the firearms folks then have their chance through the month of October. And then, of course, we have some antlerless cow seasons during December.
Okay. But so then each of those particular types of hunts, whether it's archery, firearm, the style of hunting is a little bit different, or maybe a lot a bit
Yep,
different. But
you bet.
again, the etiquette of that is shown to your fellow hunters. What are some of the things that maybe that you're aware of that come up quite often in terms of what are some of the things that are just really don'ts?
No, that's a really good question, and we hear from hunters every single year that, boy, my hunt got screwed up from this, or my hunt got screwed up from that. So the first thing I would say is, with there being so many different places to hunt here in South Dakota and then the Black Hills specifically, if you go to an area and you see somebody that's already working a ridge, already in an area hunting, it's really easy just to go ahead, look at having a spot number 2, have a plan B, have a plan C, so that if there are people in those spots, you can go to those other areas. As you can imagine, just like when you're out fishing or something else, when you're in the spot and you've spent time and you done your homework and you're in there and you got in there early, if another person comes in and ends up screwing up that hunt, it can be really frustrating, and then the morning is lost. If somebody's already in an area, best thing to do is just go ahead and go to plan B and find that other area that you have when you were out doing your scouting and move over there.
Okay, in your article, you say that the elk management plan sets a 75% goal for hunter success in the firearm units. How close do you come to that 75% goal?
In most units in the Black Hills Fire Protection District, we meet that goal of 75% and exceed that goal in some cases. H2, the big unit, is a prime example of that. We can have 80 to 85% success in those units. As you go to some of the other units, it can be lesser. It just really all depends, of course, on the year. It depends on the elk population, et cetera. Weather, everything plays a factor in that. But we're really looking with that objective of 75% success. When folks wait as long as they do in South Dakota for a tag, we want to make sure that it's really just a lifetime experience. It's once in a lifetime experience where they go out there, just really enjoy themselves, and maybe have that patch of woods to themselves and have a great hunt. And hopefully that hunt culminates with the harvest of some elk and elk meat and quite a bit of memory.
You bet. Making memories, that's what it's all about.
It is.
Mike, you are a elk hunter, correct?
I've had the luck a couple times here in South Dakota of drawing an elk license, and I was lucky both times. So I'm probably not the greatest elk hunter. I'm not the most experienced elk hunter, but I think I can call myself an elk hunter.
So the next question is, have you hunted elk with firearm, archery, or both?
I've been lucky enough to hunt both. So I've had both of my archery any elk license and my firearms any elk license.
Well, very good. So, what are the differences in terms of the equipment with regard to, obviously one's a firearm, one is not. What are the differences in the equipment? And also, are there any major differences in the strategy or the strategic approach to the hunt?
Yeah, there's some differences, quite a bit of differences. When it comes to archery hunting, you're starting in September. And in September, you can still have 80, 90-degree days. Typically in the beginning of the season, folks are out there that have those archery tags are obviously using archery equipment, but they are oftentimes hunting water holes. So during a hot day, those critters have to get water, typically sunrise, sunset. They might have that opportunity to go and harvest an elk during that time frame. It's very much like hunting deer. You're just set up in a stand. You're hunting over that water hole that maybe you had a game camera up in August to kind of figure out what was going on, and you know that the elk utilize this area. That can be a successful way of harvesting an elk. Then, of course, as September moves on, it really starts to heat up with the rut, and then it's a whole other ball game. It's very similar. I liken it to turkey hunting. If you like to turkey hunt, you're going to absolutely love archery elk hunting. Oftentimes those elk are out there, they're bugling, trying to call in those cows. They have satellite bulls that are trying to get in there, weasel with their way in there. So there's all kinds of different activity going on, and it can be really quite fun. So when you're out archery hunting, you're in the latter part of September. You're pretty much going out there, maybe utilizing a bugle to locate another bull, and then you're working your way in there using cow calls and trying to strategize how you can get close enough to get a shot. Of course, archery equipment, you're looking at typically 30, 40-yard shot is what you want.
Right.
Some of the things that play a role in whitetail deer hunting with archery also play a role with elk. Smell. You're going to have to be downwind of them. You're going to have to play that wind. That's very critical, because if they do smell you, just like deer, they're gone. They're out of there. You've now educated them. Gigs up. They're going somewhere else. On the opposite side, when it comes to firearms, again, a little bit like deer hunting in terms of you're going to be stalking. You're going to be sitting up on a ridge, glassing on the other side of a ridge, looking for those elk to come feed through an area. Again, can be quite a great hunt as well. Early in the firearm season, kind of that first and second week of October, we hear quite frequently from quite a few hunters that, boy, I found a spot where it didn't seem like anybody else had been. They were still bugling, just had a fantastic hunt, shot a great bull, and enjoyed the time. That time can be pretty good as well. But firearms, you're typically out there. You're in the beginning part of October, you're listening for those bugles. Are going to be probably less frequent than they were in September, and you're also doing those glassing and getting those areas where you think they're going to be feeding coming through. One of the employees here in the office that does quite a bit of elk hunting, is much better elk hunter than I am. One of the things that he talks about when it comes to firearms elk hunting, a tip that he had was, if you are knowing you're going to be getting your elk license, or you're getting close to that time frame when you think you're going to be getting that elk license, if you can find those elk in years prior in November, that's where they're going to be going in the latter part of October. So that can be maybe a piece of that puzzle, because as I mentioned, people get out there for the firearm season. That first week in October, they start to pressure those elk. Elk start to move around. They start to know that the gig's up. They're going to start moving into their little secret locations where they don't think they're going to be bothered. And typically those locations are away from the road, away from where everybody else will go, and they're thick and gnarly to get into.
And you mentioned that, and that's something also, I guess, that we should point out. If you are going to have to hike maybe a mile or two in to the area that you're going to be hunting, and you are fortunate enough to be successful, you need to dress that elk and dress it out, and you'll be carrying it back out. And
Yeah,
that is not an easy task. Am I right?
you hit the nail on the head there, Greg. When you the first time you drop an elk and you look at that thing, you're so happy, you're pumped that you harvested an elk, but now the work begins.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on where you shot that thing, just like you said, what you're going to basically be doing is going in there and butchering that animal, quartering it out, however you want to do it, and you're carrying it out backpack full by backpack full. If you're hunting For a bull, oftentimes you're carrying out the antlers and the head, and maybe you even caped it out. It can be quite strenuous, and that's where that preseason getting in shape really pays off. Because if you do happen to shoot a bull back in there, it's going to take you some time. I want to say when I shot my bull with my archery tag here 2 years ago, my wife was with me, and it took us 5 trips to get that critter out of there. And honestly, it wasn't that bad of a spot.
And that's exactly right. The thing that I was going to say was my first deer that I harvested was like a big doe, 160-pound doe,
Mm-hmm.
and an elk is on average a small elk would weigh what compared to a large elk, whether it's bull or cow. We're not talking 160 pounds most of the time, are we?
Yeah, no, you're tripling that, quadrupling that. You've got an animal there that, quite frankly, so when you're quartering out an elk and you're trying to maneuver it around, it's really difficult for one person to do that. And so you're kind of trying to get it into a spot where you can start to quarter it out and start to work with it. And oftentimes you have one person, hopefully with you, that can hold a leg back and kind of just help you, because that stuff is really, I mean, it's heavy. It's a real challenge to get them out. And as I mentioned before, the importance of having a pack with you. In my pack, I have knives. I have, all the different things I'm going to want to utilize. One of those things that I utilize that is really important that I bring not only for elk but for deer is I bring a tarp in there. I bring just a fairly inexpensive tarp that you can pick up at Menards or wherever, and I lay that tarp out there. And as I'm cutting up that animal, quartering it out, I'm putting those quarters on that tarp that I laid out. And as I'm going back and forth, if there might be flies or other critters in the area, I can then take that tarp and fold it back over the top of that meat so that it doesn't get to the air or insects or whatever might be out there.
And that's something that's probably a bigger concern or effort in September if you're archery hunting, as opposed to maybe a little bit later in October. It'll still be there, but you might have had a freeze or two. But still, if you're doing that in September, and then again, you're talking 90-degree days, potentially 6 trips in a 90-degree day in the Black Hills. Again, you made the comment about getting in shape. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that elk hunting is a once in a lifetime event, maybe for some people, but you do not want to go into it unprepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on those warm days or any days, having a couple of large coolers in the back of your vehicle so that when you do harvest that animal, you can bring out those quarters, throw it in your cooler, and on those warm days, if you know that it's going to be 70 plus degrees, the clock's ticking.
Mhm.
You're getting that animal out, and then you're immediately going to find a supply of ice somewhere so that you can get ice on that critter to make sure that meat stays,
Right.
uh, doesn't spoil.
Right. Mike, you mentioned the use of game cameras, particularly in the area of scouting. So, what are the regulations for the use of game cameras on public land for hunters in the state of South Dakota?
Yeah, well, this scenario plays out in a couple of different ways. So, as we know, we have multiple public lands out there managed by multiple agencies. So, we have game production areas that are owned by the state. We allow for game cameras to be utilized for scouting game, etc. And on those, we require that you have the name and address of the owner or user of that camera, or they put their license number for that year on the camera as well. So that's on a game production area that's state owned. That's the yellow sign. And then we move over to a Forest Service property. Forest Service property, they don't have any requirements for any sort of ownership, name, number on those properties.
Okay.
Moving over to one more thing that's important, because there's a lot of people that utilize it, walk-in areas. Those are those lands that are leased from private landowners for public use for hunting. On those areas, if a person wants to use a game camera, they have to have permission from the landowner.
Okay. That's good to know. That's something that
Yeah.
I think that I've heard stories, I guess, of different conflicts that have arisen uh, due to people not knowing the regulations, and that's one of the things that you need to do. You need to make sure that if you're going to be a licensed hunter and you're going to be one of those stewards of the land and help each other out, you need to make sure that you're doing things right and you know the regulations. So Thank you for that
Yeah,
information.
you bet.
Well, Mike, one of the things that I wanted to try to accomplish was to learn about elk and elk behavior and learn about some of the things that a person really needs to understand and be prepared for with regard to elk hunting. And I think I have accomplished all of the goals that I had coming into this interview. So I appreciate that. But the one thing that I guess I want to just share with listeners is that we talk about on Broken Arrows, healing through the hunt. We encourage people to get outside, get outdoors, and enjoy its healing powers. And I think you talked numerous times about elk bugling, and the first elk bugle that I heard sent chills down my spine. It was an amazing event. And so if you haven't spent time in the Black Hills, if you haven't had the opportunity to observe elk in the wild, this would be one of those things that to take the time to do that, do a little research in terms of when and where you want to do it. I think it would be a perfect opportunity for people, and I appreciate you taking the time to help our listeners get to know one of South Dakota's prized resources with regard to wildlife. Well, again, Mike, thank you very much for your time. I hope this isn't the only time that we have a conversation. Hopefully, if it's you're up to it, different times of the year, especially maybe leading into the fall season, and maybe we could have another conversation with regard to how the management of the elk in South Dakota is going, and an update in terms of what hunters should expect for the upcoming season.
Yeah, that sure would be great, and I would be honored to be invited again. It was great visiting with you. It's great to get this information out. Great cause that you guys have with this program, and look forward to it.
Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate your time, and again, take care.
You bet. Thank you.
And as we end our program, we always like to remind people that if you or someone you know is thinking of suicide or in need of crisis intervention, please call the Suicide Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. The world is a better place with you in it. So, to all our listeners, take some time to get outside, enjoy the outdoors, and experience its healing powers. With that, on behalf of Catherine and me, until next time.